Reach into your pantry right now, and there's a good chance one of these 7 cans is sitting there, bought because it looked like the healthy choice. Clean label, maybe organic, definitely natural, the kind of purchase people make on autopilot while planning the rest of the curry or smoothie. Here's what most people never find out. Some of these brands lean on a preservative the FDA specifically requires disclosed because it can trigger serious breathing reactions. Buried in small type on a can most shoppers have trusted for years. One brand's supply chain got dropped by Costco, Target, and half a dozen other major retailers in the same season over something that has nothing to do with nutrition at all and everything to do with how the coconuts actually got picked. We're going through 7 coconut milk brands worth reconsidering, ranked from the mildest concern to the most serious, then 3 that actually hold up under the same scrutiny. No vague warnings, just specific ingredients, specific ownership structures, and one specific supply chain story that made national headlines for reasons that have nothing to do with what's actually in the can. Every claim here is something you can verify yourself off the actual label. Let's get into it. Number 7. Whole Foods 365 Coconut Milk. The house brand of the store that built its entire retail identity around the promise of cleaner food carries an implicit guarantee before a shopper ever reads the back panel. Just carrying the Whole Foods label does a lot of psychological work before you've even read the ingredients. It signals that someone already checked, that the store's own standards extend to everything on the shelf, and that the premium price tag is buying oversight most competitors don't offer. The non-organic version of 365 coconut milk contains guar gum as a stabilizer, and like most private label coconut milk sold at this price point, it's co-packed by third-party manufacturers operating out of Thailand, the same general processing region and supplier pool that supplies several other brands on this list, just wearing different packaging and a more reassuring logo. That's not automatically damning on its own, but it does mean the trust a shopper places in the Whole Foods name isn't necessarily buying oversight that's meaningfully different from a cheaper store brand sitting 2 aisles over at a regular supermarket. Open a can, and it tends to separate faster than a higher fat product should, with a thinner, waterier consistency than the price point implies once you actually pour it into a pot. None of that makes it dangerous. It does mean the premium you're paying is buying a label more than it's buying a fundamentally different supply chain, which is worth knowing before you reach past the cheaper option next to it on the very same shelf, sitting there at a fraction of the price for what turns out to be a comparable product underneath the packaging. Number 6. Silk Coconut Milk. Not every product on this list even needs to be canned to earn a spot here, and this one makes that point clearly. The half-gallon carton sitting in the dairy case signals plant-based wellness from 3 feet away, marketed as the heart-healthy swap for coffee, cereal, and smoothies, stocked at eye level in nearly every American grocery store. The kind of shelf placement that communicates mainstream trust before you've read a single ingredient. Then you read the ingredient panel. Actual coconut cream makes up a small fraction of what's in that carton. The bulk of it is filtered water, thickeners like gellan gum and locust bean gum, and in some formulations, carrageenan, a seaweed-derived thickener that peer-reviewed research has associated with intestinal inflammation. The flavored varieties carry a meaningful sugar load per serving, enough that pouring a flavored version into your coffee for health reasons can add up to more added sugar than people realize they're consuming across a week of mornings. The vitamin D fortification typically uses D2 rather than D3, a form the body absorbs less efficiently, a distinction that matters more the further past 50 someone gets, since vitamin D status affects bone density and immune response either way. Pour it into a hot cup of coffee, and it can curdle slightly at the edges, the gellan gum failing under heat rather than the coffee itself being at fault, something most people never trace back to the carton. None of. This makes Silk dangerous in isolation, but it does mean a product marketed and priced as a nutritional upgrade is, by ingredient weight, mostly water and gum thickeners with a coconut flavor layered on top of it. Number 5. So Delicious Coconut Milk. This is the wellness aisle staple the carton people photograph for their morning routine before they've actually read what's inside it. So Delicious sits at Whole Foods, Sprouts, and natural grocers at a price point that implies something more considered than the supermarket options next to it, aimed specifically at the shopper who already reads labels and has ruled out the cheaper cartons for exactly this reason. The kind of buyer who feels like they've already done the hard work by choosing this aisle in the first place. The ingredient panel doesn't fully reward that extra scrutiny. Several flavored varieties carry an added sugar load that rivals or exceeds a can of soda. And the formulation leans on natural flavors, a legally permitted catch-all category that can represent a range of processed flavor compounds without requiring the manufacturer to specify what's actually in it. The same loophole that shows up across the processed food aisle generally. None of that is unique to this brand, but it does undercut the specific promise the wellness aisle pricing is built on. Open the carton, and there's an immediate sweetness in the aroma before anything's poured, and the texture afterward carries a faint, gum-thickened stickiness on the lips that a plain, unflavored coconut milk wouldn't have. A shopper managing blood sugar or blood pressure, choosing this specifically because it felt like the responsible option compared to what's in the regular dairy case, is often getting a sweetened beverage with a coconut tree printed on the front and a wellness price tag attached to it. Number 4. Native Forest Coconut Milk. Standard. Not everything on this list is a stranger to the good side of it, and this brand is the clearest example of that. This is the earth-toned label built for the consumer who already does the homework, reads panels, asks about sourcing, and is willing to pay more because the brand seems to reflect those values back at them. Native Forest earned real trust on one specific point. Its cans are BPA-free. Verified through independent lab testing, the company has published for years, using a titanium dioxide-based lining rather than the epoxy resin that historically carried bisphenol A into canned goods across the industry. That part genuinely holds up under scrutiny. What doesn't get the same attention is that the standard formulation still contains guar gum, and guar gum carries a real documented interaction with the most widely prescribed thyroid medication in the country, levothyroxine. As a bulk-forming fiber, it can slow gastric transit enough to meaningfully reduce how much of an oral medication actually gets absorbed if the two are taken too close together. Someone managing hypothyroidism who takes their pill in the morning and pours this into a smoothie at lunch isn't necessarily getting the full benefit of that prescription. And nothing printed on the can flags the interaction because there's no legal requirement that it does. The brand did eventually solve this. More on that later in this video, just not in the version most people are actually reaching for off the regular shelf, since the fixed version sits quietly next to it under a different name. That's 4 down, 3 left on the avoid list, and the concerns are about to get more serious than a stabilizer or a lower coconut ratio. Move past a supply chain question and a legacy can lining, and the next 3 brands involve an actual documented sourcing scandal, a preservative the FDA treats seriously enough to mandate disclosure, and a case where both problems show up in the same can. Number 3. Goya Coconut Milk. This is where the family trust angle actually starts to matter more than the ingredient itself. The blue and yellow can behind Goya's coconut milk has been a fixture in Hispanic households across 3 generations, trusted less because of advertising and more because of decades of habit passed down through families. Grandmothers reaching for it, their daughters reaching for it, their own kids reaching for it now without a second thought. That depth of loyalty is exactly why the ingredient list is worth a closer look rather than less of one. Goya's coconut milk is preserved with sodium metabisulfite, a sulfite compound. Sulfites are a well-established trigger for allergic-type reactions, hives, throat tightness, and in people with asthma, genuine breathing difficulty, which is precisely why the FDA requires them disclosed on food labels, rather than folding them into a vague catch-all category the way fragrance or flavor compounds sometimes get treated elsewhere in food packaging. Sulfite sensitivity tends to become more pronounced with age, and for someone with diagnosed asthma or COPD, a reaction can develop within minutes of exposure to a meal cooked with it. The ingredient is listed in small type, in a spot most shoppers skip because the brand has already earned their trust over years of consistent use. Goya generates well over $1 billion a year in revenue, Sourcing a coconut milk that doesn't lean on a sulfite preservative is not a cost constraint at that scale. It's simply a formulation the company has never felt pressure to change. Number 2. Thai Kitchen Coconut Milk. Ownership matters here more than most shoppers realize, and it's the first thing worth knowing before anything else. The clean white can with blue script reads as the simple, approachable choice for weeknight curries, sold everywhere from Walmart to Target to Kroger, positioned as the accessible entry point for home cooks who want something a step above the plainest supermarket option. Most shoppers don't realize the spice conglomerate McCormick actually owns Thai Kitchen, a detail that appears nowhere on the packaging and changes the context of what you're actually buying, since a household name in spices isn't necessarily the same thing as a company with deep expertise in canned dairy alternatives. The standard, non-organic version has historically used cans with BPA-based linings, rather than the alternative coatings some competitors switched to years ago, and it contains guar gum as well. BPA is an endocrine-disrupting compound that migrates more readily into fatty, acidic contents like coconut milk than it does into drier packaged goods, and that migration accelerates the longer a can sits at room temperature on a pantry shelf, which is exactly where most people store it for months at a time between recipes. None of this is exotic or hidden. It's a legacy packaging choice a large, well-resourced parent company has simply never prioritized updating in a product category where several competitors made that switch years ago and advertise it prominently on the label. Number 1. Chaokoh Coconut Milk. This is the worst offender on the list, and it's not close. The concern here goes well beyond anything in a chemistry panel. The orange and white can with the smiling coconut was, until recently, one of the highest volume coconut milk brands in American Asian grocery stores and a genuine Costco staple, sought out specifically for its thick, custardy texture that home cooks compared favorably to far more expensive brands. In 2020, PETA published an investigation into Thailand's coconut supply chain that found pigtail macaque monkeys, pulled from the wild while still infants, held on chains, and drilled to scale trees and knock coconuts down for shifts that could stretch 16 hours. The investigation specifically implicated Thepa Dungporn Coconut Company, the manufacturer behind Chaokoh, documenting animals kept tethered between shifts and confined to cages barely larger than their own bodies. Once the findings became public, Costco, Target, Walgreens, Food Lion, Giant Food, Stop and Shop, and Wegmans all pulled the brand from their shelves within months of each other, a rare instance of major retailers acting in near unison on a supply chain allegation rather than waiting each other out. Chaokoh didn't disappear as a company, it shifted towards smaller retailers, Asian grocery stores, and online marketplaces where the 2020 headlines are far less likely to follow it or influence a purchase decision made quickly in a crowded aisle. On top of the sourcing issue, Chaokoh's own ingredient list includes sodium metabisulfite, the same sulfite preservative flagged in Goya's can earlier on this list, meaning the brand carries both the supply chain concern and the same respiratory reaction risk in a single product. Pulled from the shelves where the story broke and got national coverage, still sitting quietly on shelves in the stores where it never made the news at all. That's the full list. 7 brands, 7 separately documented concerns, ranging from a legacy packaging choice nobody's bothered to update to a supply chain scandal serious enough that half the major retailers in the country walked away from it in the same season. None of these are obscure imports either. These are the cans and cartons sitting in the most visible spots in ordinary American grocery stores, which is exactly why most of these problems go unnoticed for years at a time. Now here's what actually holds up when you apply the same level of scrutiny to the other side of the aisle. Best Pick 3. Native Value Coconut Milk. Sometimes the safest option on the shelf is also the least exciting one, and that's exactly the case here. This is the plainest option on the good list, and that's the entire point rather than a shortcoming. The ingredient panel reads coconut extract and water. Nothing else. No fillers dressed up in more official-sounding language. No gums, no stabilizers, no sulfite preservatives, and the company has stated its cans use a BPA-free lining rather than the traditional epoxy resin that shows up across so much of the canned goods aisle generally. It won't win points for branding or an inspiring story printed on the label, and the texture separates a little more than a stabilized product would sitting on a shelf for weeks, which is simply what coconut milk without a thickener actually looks like when nothing's been added to hold it together artificially. Stir it before you use it, and it performs exactly the way a two-ingredient product should, with nothing surprising once it's actually in the pan. For anyone who wants the packaging risk and the additive list both handled without paying a premium price for either one, this is about as unremarkable, in the best possible sense, as coconut milk gets, and unremarkable is exactly the right standard here. Best Pick 2. Native Forest Organic Simple. This entry rewards paying closer attention to the shelf than most shoppers ever bother to. Same parent company as the standard Native Forest can sitting further up this list, and that's genuinely worth sitting with for a second. The company clearly knows how to make a cleaner product because it already does, just not under the label most shoppers grab by default while reaching for the more familiar option. The simple line strips the ingredient panel down to organic coconut and water, full stop. No gar gum, which means no interaction risk for anyone managing thyroid medication and no reason to think twice about timing it around a morning prescription. The cans carry the same independently verified BPA-free lining as the standard version, and the product is both USDA organic certified and non-GMO project verified, meaning the coconuts themselves were grown without the synthetic pesticides that show up as a recurring concern across conventional Thai supply chains generally, not just for this one brand. Open a can, and the cream sits thick, closer to solid than liquid at room temperature, which is what real, undiluted coconut cream actually does before anything gets added to stretch it further or smooth it into something more pourable. It runs close to $1 more per can than the standard version sitting nearby on the exact same shelf. Given what that dollar is actually buying, the gar gum removed, the interaction risk eliminated, nothing changed about the packaging that already worked, it's not a close call at all. Best Pick 1. Aroy-D Coconut Milk. This is the brand that resolves the entire question this investigation has been circling from the very first can. The most effective fix here isn't a cleaner can, it's skipping the can entirely, which sidesteps the whole packaging question rather than trying to solve it from the inside. Aroy-D sells its coconut milk in shelf-stable Tetra Pak cartons, which removes the metal can lining question at the source before it can even become a variable worth worrying about. There's no bisphenol coating to migrate into the fat over months of pantry storage because there's no metal lining in the first place to carry it. The ingredient list is about as short as this category gets. Coconut extract and water, with lab analyses and label data consistently showing coconut content in the range of 70%, well above what most canned competitors on this list actually deliver once the water and stabilizers are accounted for and subtracted from the total. No sulfites, no gar gum, nothing masking a lower coconut ratio behind a generic natural flavor line, the way some of the flavored cartons higher up this list do. It's available at Asian grocery stores, H-Mart, and online, typically for less than several of the brands on the avoid list, which means the cleanest option here also happens to be one of the cheapest, removing the usual excuse that the safer choice always costs more. Here's the pattern worth carrying into your next grocery run, and none of it requires memorizing chemistry. First, check for sulfites, sodium or potassium metabisulfite, since federal law requires that disclosure specifically because of how serious the reaction risk can be for sensitive individuals, and it's easy to skim past in small print on a can you already trust from years of buying it without a second thought. Second, look at where the can itself comes from and how it's lined. BPA-free claims that are backed by published independent lab testing means something real and verifiable, while a can that simply doesn't mention its lining at all usually hasn't updated it, because companies that have made the switch tend to advertise it prominently rather than staying quiet about it. Third, if you're managing a thyroid condition or take medication that depends on consistent gut absorption, gar gum is worth checking for by name on the ingredient panel. It's not dangerous for most people, but it's not inert for everyone either, and the interaction is real, even if it rarely makes it onto a label. Fourth, remember that a supply chain problem doesn't always show up in the ingredient list at all. Chaokoh's cans read perfectly reasonably on paper, and the actual issue was never something a chemistry background would have caught, which is exactly why it's worth knowing the brand names behind the headlines and not just the ingredient panels. None of these checks take more than a few seconds once you know where to look, and none of them require giving up coconut milk altogether. Just being more deliberate about which specific can actually earn a spot in your cart this time, rather than the one you've grabbed on autopilot for years. If this changed how you'll shop the coconut milk aisle next time, share it with whoever in your life still has that orange and white can in their pantry or the crisp blue and yellow one their family has bought without question for decades. None of the 7 brands on this list are obscure or hard to find. They're the ones filling shopping carts across the country precisely because the labels look reassuring. And nobody's had a reason to look closer until now. They're reading the front of the label the same way most people do. It's what's printed in the small type, or what never made it onto the label at all, that tells the real story. The 3 that held up are sitting on the exact same shelves, often for the same price or less, and switching costs nothing more than reaching for a different can the next time you're standing in that aisle.